The morning sun filtered through the airport's towering glass walls, casting long golden streaks across the polished floor. Travelers hurried in every direction, dragging rolling suitcases behind them, eyes fixed on departure boards or glowing phone screens. Amid the rush stood Daniel Carter, a 36-year-old single father whose face carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who hadn't truly rested in years. One hand gripped the handle of an old suitcase while the other gently supported his 68-year-old mother, Eleanor. Eleanor had once been the strongest woman Daniel had ever known. She had worked 2 jobs after her husband died young, sacrificing everything so her only son could attend college. She never complained, even when money barely covered rent. But Parkinson's disease had slowly stolen pieces of her independence. Her hands trembled constantly. Sometimes her feet refused to obey her mind, freezing without warning. Speaking took effort, and strangers often mistook her soft, hesitant words for confusion. Today they were flying across the country to visit a renowned neurological specialist. Months of saving, endless paperwork, and countless phone calls had finally earned Eleanor an appointment that offered a small ray of hope. Daniel balanced backpacks, medications, and boarding documents while constantly checking on his mother. "You okay, Mom?" he asked with a reassuring smile. She nodded slowly. "I'm just slower these days. You've earned the right." She laughed softly. "Flatterer." After clearing security, they reached the boarding gate almost an hour early. Empty seats surrounded them, yet something unsettling happened. Whenever Eleanor's trembling became noticeable, nearby passengers quietly gathered their belongings and moved elsewhere. A middle-aged businessman frowned before walking away. A young couple exchanged nervous glances. One woman whispered loudly enough for Daniel to hear. "I hope she isn't contagious." Daniel clenched his jaw. Parkinson's wasn't contagious. But correcting strangers had become exhausting. Instead, he looked at his mother. She pretended not to notice. She always pretended. Years of living with the disease had taught her how invisible people wanted her to become. When boarding finally began, Daniel carefully guided Eleanor down the jet bridge. Every step required patience. Passengers behind them sighed dramatically. Someone muttered, "Can they move any slower?" Daniel ignored the comment. He helped his mother reach their economy seats near the middle of the aircraft. As Eleanor settled into the aisle seat, her shaking hands accidentally brushed against the armrest of the passenger already seated beside her. The woman immediately recoiled. "Oh!" She quickly pressed the flight attendant call button. A few moments later, another attendant arrived. "Is something wrong?" The passenger lowered her voice, but not enough. "I don't feel comfortable sitting here." The attendant glanced politely toward Eleanor. "May I ask why?" I'd rather have another seat." Within minutes she had moved to an empty row farther back. Daniel pretended not to notice. Eleanor stared quietly out the window. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Daniel reached for her trembling hand. "You've done absolutely nothing wrong." She smiled weakly. "I know." But her eyes suggested otherwise. Soon other passengers began noticing Eleanor's involuntary movements. Some watched with curiosity. Others with discomfort. A little boy pointed. "Mommy, why is that grandma shaking?" His mother quickly pulled his hand down. "Don't stare." But she never answered his question. Daniel had grown used to silence replacing compassion. As boarding continued, one final flight attendant walked down the aisle. Her name tag read Claire. She looked to be in her early 30s with kind eyes and a calm smile that somehow made the noisy cabin seem quieter. She greeted passengers warmly while helping with Claire smiled warmly, as if nothing about the situation was unusual. "You know," she said gently, "my grandmother had Parkinson's too." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "She did?" Claire nodded. "For nearly 15 years. She used to apologize every time her hands shook. She thought she was making people uncomfortable. But to me, those hands were the ones that baked birthday cakes, held mine when I was scared, and taught me how to be kind." For the first time that day, Eleanor's eyes filled with tears for a reason other than sadness. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Claire replied. "And I see that same strength in you." Daniel quietly looked away, swallowing the lump in his throat. No stranger had spoken to his mother like that in years. Claire noticed Eleanor struggling to hold a bottle of water. Without making a scene, she opened it and placed it carefully into Eleanor's hands. "There you go." "Thank you, dear." "My pleasure." Before returning to her duties, Claire leaned closer. "If you need anything during this flight, anything at all, just let me know." As she walked away, several nearby passengers had witnessed the exchange. The same people who had avoided Eleanor now watched Claire with puzzled expressions. If a professional flight attendant treated the elderly woman with such warmth, perhaps they had judged her too quickly. About 30 minutes into the flight, turbulence suddenly shook the aircraft. The seatbelt sign illuminated. The plane bounced hard enough that several passengers gasped. Eleanor's tremors became noticeably worse. Her hands shook so violently that the blanket slipped to the floor. Daniel reached down to grab it, but Claire appeared almost immediately. "I've got it." She picked up the blanket, gently tucked it around Eleanor's legs, and asked softly, "Would you like me to stay with you for a minute?" Eleanor hesitated. "I don't want to be any trouble." Claire smiled. "You're not trouble." She pulled down the jump seat directly across the aisle and sat facing Eleanor. For several minutes, while the plane continued through rough air, Claire simply talked with her. Not about illness. Not about medicine. About gardens. Favorite books. Homemade apple pie. Old music. The conversation sounded like two old friends catching up after years apart. Gradually, Eleanor's breathing steadied. Her shoulders relaxed. Even her trembling seemed less overwhelming because someone was treating her like a person instead of a condition. Across the aisle, the little boy who had asked about the shaking leaned toward his mother. "Can I talk to Grandma?" His mother looked embarrassed after realizing how quickly she had pulled him away earlier. "If she's okay with it." The boy carefully walked over. "Hi." Eleanor smiled. "Hello there. My name is Noah." "I'm Eleanor. Why do your hands shake?" The cabin became unusually quiet. Adults listened carefully. Instead of feeling offended, Eleanor answered honestly. "My brain sends messages to my body, sweetheart. Sometimes those messages get mixed up." "Does it hurt?"